Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good morning. It is 7:06. We're so glad to have you with us here this morning. It's O'Connor and Company. We've got a great lineup today. At 7:35, we'll talk to Peter Schweizer, a best-selling author. He's going to talk to us about Tim Waltz's trips to China. I think we all deserve some answers on that. We're not getting them from Tim Waltz. At 8:05, we'll talk to Brad Thor, author of a new book, Shadow of Doubt. And at 8:35, Governor Scott Walker on the new Reagan movie. I'm Julie Gunlock alongside Larry O'Connor. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning to you, Julie. And I have a question for you. You're
Sure.
pretty plugged in, you with all your highfalutin, high-power friends here
that's
in
right.
D.C. Well, you worked on Capitol Hill. You're Independent Women's Forum. You live in Alexandria. You are part of the elite
Yes.
cocktail party set. I got just a simple
Please.
because
So many cocktail receptions.
you need to have the kind of influence and access that you have, Julie Gunlock, to be able to answer this question, because it's something that's, most people are sort of perplexed by it. They're not quite sure what's good, but you know these things. You have a history in this town, and you've got contacts. So just, if I may, is it all right?
Sure.
All right.
What's the question, Larry?
Who's the president of the United States right now?
No.
See, that's unnerving that someone like you doesn't know.
Yeah,
that.
I know. I mean,
figured you'd be able to.
for so long, I was able to easily answer with Jill Biden.
It's
obviously.
funny. It's one of those questions where it's, if you find somebody, if the police have to go to a horrible accident and there's somebody who's like suffered head trauma,
Right.
and they've been unconscious and they revive them and the paramedics are on the scene, right? And one of the questions to see how bad their brain damage is who's the president of the United States? Right? And I think whoever has been, just had that horrible head-on collision or just got T-boned on the Beltway,
It's no longer
and they're trying to revive them and assess how bad the brain damage is, and their appropriate, actually well-informed answer will be, I'm not quite sure.
I don't know.
I have no idea who the president is right now.
Your
And they're gonna
guess
be like,
is as good as mine.
traumatic brain injury. We got to send him. Let's. But no, I mean, I think it's a pretty legitimate line of questioning
The
right now.
only
For
answer,
every
the
American.
only answer right now, just for this immediate time, is Barack Obama. That
I
is the
suppose.
only.
Well, but then it's like, okay, so what? Oh, so you just lost the last 12 years of your life? Is that what you're saying?
We all have, Larry.
Yes. So James Rosen, the senior White House correspondent for Newsmax, who I believe has not suffered any kind of traumatic brain injury anytime recently, he raised the exact same question with Admiral John Kirby, who is now the spokesperson for the National Security Council. I believe possibly Admiral Kirby has suffered some traumatic brain injury.
Stop.
But here's how the exchange went with a simple question: who's running the country?
The question I am hearing from members of the general public, and which I put to you here, Admiral, is who is running the country?
President Joe Biden.
Is he a ceremonial figure in some sense at this point?
James, now you know better than that.
No,
I mean,
we don't.
My goodness, you talked to Prime Minister Modi today. He had calls with leaders in the region and in Europe. President Zelensky last week. He monitored in real time what was going on over the weekend. I mean, come on.
That's the best we got.
Yeah, and
You know better than that. Come on.
This is a man who's been on vacation now, for 3 weeks? He went from his his rich friend in California, who apparently that's okay when it's Biden. You're not allowed to go and visit your friends if you're a Supreme Court justice, or rather a conservative Supreme Court justice. Anyway, so he goes to his rich friend in California, and then he goes straight to his Delaware beach house.
Right.
And lays prostrate on the beach, which is so disturbing. I mean, just laying there sleeping.
Yeah, I don't know why we
while
show
the
that.
world is burning down.
We get that. Vision all
Yeah,
the time.
and then Jill Biden terrorizes a small California town because she and her daughter want to go shopping. The Secret Service is pushing people out of the way, and then And then Biden comes out of an ice cream shop and just says, he grunts something. We haven't heard from the president in 3 weeks. Something like that, I think.
So since the day he announced, well, he didn't really announce it, did he? Since the day somebody who manages his social media account put out a letter claiming that he is going to remove himself from the presidential nomination consideration, he has spent, and I kid you not, and that was 49 days ago now, if I remember right,
something like that.
He has spent 6 days in the White House.
Oh my God.
6 days in
Wild.
the White House, and everybody seems fine with this.
Yeah,
and it's not like there's nothing going on.
I know, yeah.
Right? And so I think that it was fair to ask that question. What is these are such strange times we're living in. You're right. It's not strange that James Rosen from Newsmax had to ask the spokesperson from the National Security Council who was running the country. What's strange is he's the only one who asked that question.
Yeah. And again, I find this to be sometimes tiresome, but it is important to say, what would happen if this were a Trump administration and Trump decided to take 3 weeks off and then was laying, on a beach while the world burned down? I mean, be absolute hysteria in the White House, among the White House press corps.
Of course there would. And they would demand. Answers. They would absolutely demand. But
couple this with the fact that Kamala won't even do an interview. And now she's agreed to do one with her emotional support sidekick.
Well, and her political profile right now is to pretend as though she is running against whoever the president is right now. Yeah, it's like Kamala Harris, who's running the country. I have no idea, but I know I'm against them. It's like, wait a second.
Exactly.
That's her public political profile at the moment.
I have nothing to do with that person.
Yeah, as Politico wrote, J.D. Vance is trying to tether Kamala Harris to the Biden administration. It's like, wait, you mean tether herself to her own administration? And we get the daily guidance for the president and the vice president every single day, and all it says is where they are. Yeah. And it doesn't say, there's nothing else on their agenda.
Right.
Like Monday, August 26th, the president and first lady will remain in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, period. That's the entire daily guidance for the president of the United States. Wednesday, August 28th, that's today, right? 10 o'clock, the president will receive his daily brief, period. That's it. At 10 a.m., Joe Biden will be briefed, and that will be the end of it. What's the vice president scheduled today? 1:55, vice president departs D.C. en route to Savannah, Georgia. 3:25, the vice president arrives at Savannah, Georgia, at Hilton Head International Airport. And then the vice president will begin a series of campaign events. And that's it. So there is actually no business of state happening.
Done. And what's so sad is this is perfectly acceptable to many Democrats.
Well, because her job right now is to win. I shouldn't even say her job is to win.
No.
Her job is to keep Trump from winning.
That's it.
Her job is to keep Trump from winning. And that's Joe Biden's job. Joe Biden is not the president. His job is to make sure that Trump doesn't win. And the very best thing he can do is to disappear. Mm-hmm. The more you see Joe Biden, the more you are reminded that he is, yes, tethered to Kamala Harris, and that the two of them have sent this country into a death spiral. But if you don't see that, and if you're not reminded of that, then Donald Trump could still lose, and that's their job. And when I say they, I mean Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and pretty much 95% of the reporters who are paid to cover politics in Washington, D.C. It's 7:15, WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the fives with Jamie Whitten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
WMAL. Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Julie, am I weird?
Yes.
Hey.
Oh, did I answer that too quickly?
And way too emphatically. Every time it's 76 degrees, I want to sing from The Music Man. Come on, I can't be the only one.
I think you're the only one.
76 degrees in Washington, D.C.
That was good.
It didn't really work.
No.
You know who else is weird? Robert Kennedy Jr.
He is a little strange.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that he is a weird dude, and he has always been a weird.
I mean, can you be a Kennedy and not be weird?
Thank you.
Honestly, they're all
Thank
weird.
you. And it's well documented that he has had drug problems for much of his youth. And when I say youth, I'm talking 50 years ago, because the dude is 70, right?
Yeah.
And he was caught at 16 with marijuana possession. He actually I think was arrested for heroin possession at one point when he was at Harvard. And it was written off to like, well, he's been through a dramatic time. He lost his father at a young age from assassination. He's really going to let him. And it seems like he certainly has turned the corner. I know there's not been any suggestions of drug use in 30 years about RFK Jr., I think. And he seems pretty healthy. I mean, you've seen him, pumping iron at Muscle Beach, right?
No, a couple of people that think he might be enhancing some of those muscles, but
all right, if he does have a drug problem, it's
like,
steroids.
yeah.
All right, we'll give you that.
Yeah.
Little roid rage going on there with RFK Jr. But I think it's fair to say that he is a quirky dude. And but what's funny is the mainstream media and pop culture have celebrated RFK Jr. for years and years and years as this heroic champion who's trying to follow in his father's footsteps, fighting for people, fighting for the disenfranchised, fighting to save our planet through his newfound embrace of climate and all that stuff, right? And it wasn't until he became a potential political roadblock for Joe Biden that suddenly he wasn't described that way anymore. At the time, the media, I think, as a collective, just decided to ignore him. Best thing to do is to just take all the oxygen out. We're going to pretend he doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
That's why there was no demands for a debate between Democrat potential candidates. They went ahead and accepted the DNC's, complete and total news blackout on any options for an open ballot process or a debate process or a convention process. Nope. We're just going to ignore the existence of Robert Kennedy Jr. Right up until Friday, when he came out, suspended his campaign, and endorsed Donald Trump. Now all the stories come out.
Yep.
We saw one over the weekend where somebody 50 years after the fact claims that RFK Jr. was a cocaine dealer while he was at Harvard.
And again, he's never denied that he's had problems with drugs. And so this was just exploiting that and trying to suggest that he's this bad dude who has. Right. Meanwhile, everyone ignored Hunter Biden.
Continue to ignore Hunter.
Yeah.
He's just a troubled guy. And
yes,
he's just,
there's none of the troubled guy narrative from this.
Let him get over his addiction, which, by the way, as far as we know, he was still addicted like as recently as 4 years ago.
Well, also with Hunter Biden, they always draw back to the death of his mother, right?
And his brother.
And his brother. And they say, he was, meanwhile, this is a Kennedy. There's been some family trauma, okay? So if we're going to extend the sympathy to Hunter Biden, suddenly that just evaporates when it comes to RFK.
By the way, we're not, because Donald Trump went through trauma of his brother poisoning himself from addiction.
Absolutely.
And the lesson he learned is, I'm not going to touch this stuff.
We know that there are certain standards for certain people.
So now we have another... we have another story.
This one is so funny, though.
I thought this was going to be critter news. Can we?
We should have the music.
This does involve critter. I think this is technically a political RFK Jr. mashup of critter news.
There we go. Now we can have fun with it.
As you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is an outdoorsman. He is a environmentalist. He's sort of a Bear Grylls type. Like, if I'm going to get dropped in the middle of a wilderness with no clothes and just like a penknife, I want Bobby Kennedy on my side because no one's going to mess with us.
I don't want to be an animal, though.
No.
A dog or a bear.
An environmental advocacy group called for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be investigated after a new story has been resurfaced where his daughter, Kick Kennedy... What is with these rich elite?
Kick
New
was
England type?
was JFK's sister. She was the one who married the British lord and went down in a plane during World War II. She's named after Kick.
The name is Kick?
Yes. So Joe and Rose.
You're so good with royal families.
Yes, I am. I'm sure it stands for Kathleen or something like that, but Kick was her nickname.
All right. According to Kick, the daughter of Bobby Kennedy Jr., there's a story from Town and Country that has been circulated again this week. This comes from a while ago, where apparently Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for some inexplicable reason, cut off the head of a whale.
Okay, a dead whale that had been beached.
In 1994.
So,
the mammal washed up on the shore in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, where the Kennedys, of course, have a compound because they all have compounds. And he, every time we accelerated on the highway, whale juice would pour into the windows of the car.
They strapped it to the top of the car.
Yeah, they had to bungee
Romney-esque.
this whale to the top of the car. And, of course, the only way to do it is to cut it into Every time we accelerated on the highway, whale juice would pour into the windows from the car. It was the rankest thing on the planet, Kick said in a Town and Country place. We all had plastic bags over our heads with mouth holes cut out, and people on the highway were giving us the finger, but that was just a normal day-to-day stuff for us.
Okay, can I give a little bit of background? He was very interested in whale skulls.
Yeah.
He was very interested in examining them. So there's this dead whale. And I'm sure, the proper thing to do would have been, calling some state agency and having the whale removed. Well, he just went down there with a chainsaw and cut off the whale's head, strapped it to the top of the car.
I love how you say he just went. You're right. Most people hearing about a beached whale would say, you know what, we should probably call somebody. I just had a beached fox in my front yard.
I know,
and
you had to share the photo with all of us.
I didn't think to myself, ooh, let me get a knife and chop that animal's head off.
Well, I'm glad. Okay, but
Bobby Kennedy, he said there's a beached whale at Hyannisport. All right,
I can't believe I'm the defender of RFK chopping off a whale.
That whale's head.
Look, he was interested in the whale skull and examining the whale skull. I have to say, I feel like this is something my dad would do. So I'm feeling a little bit defensive of this. My dad would be like, cool, there's a beached whale. Anyway, the story sounds like he wrestled a whale and killed it and then chopped its head off.
Yeah.
It was beached. He just...
Yeah, but if he did wrestle the whale and chop his head off, that'd be badass.
You're right. That would be very Game of Thrones. Very cool.
But in this case, learning that there was a dead whale on the beach, he decided to drive down, chop his head off, which he did, strapped it to the top of the car, and then drove it home.
In other news, Kick Kennedy is actually dating Ben Affleck now, post J-Lo. I was trying to round out all the
all
the
comes
gossip
together. It all makes sense now. It's 7:20.
Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:37 now on this fabulous Wednesday in the nation's capital. We've already taken care of quite a bit here, and if you haven't listened, well, you should be subscribing to our podcast so you can download it and catch it later. And there's quite a bit ahead. Coming up at 8:05, Brad Thor with his brand new book, Shadow of Doubt. It's always a good way to end your summer with a new thriller from Brad Thor. And then at 8:35, Governor Scott Walker, president of Young America's Foundation, on the brand new Reagan movie. We just got a Cal Thomas review of that movie. He says 2 thumbs up, and you should go see it. And I'm seeing it this weekend. Julie, are you going to take the boys to see the Reagan movie?
Oh, definitely, for sure.
That's Julie Gunlock. I'm Larry O'Connor, and joining us right now, one of our faves. He's the author of Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. He's Peter Schweizer. And Peter, always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
You must be quite intrigued by the amazing backstory here of one Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who is now poised to be the vice president should the election go the Democrats' way this November. One thing in his bio which sticks out to me, and I still haven't gotten any real answers about it, is the fact that he has visited China, I believe, over 30 times. And let's just start with that. Just the fact that he has done that. Again, he was a member of the National Guard. He was a school teacher. And then he ended up being a member of Congress. Is that normal? Does that, if I may say, raise a red flag that a school teacher decided to proactively go visit communist China over 30 times during his career?
Well, you could charitably say, well, he just loves the Chinese people in China. But when you start to unpack it, it looks very interesting and troubling. He's tried to characterize it as these are exchange programs. Harvard University was involved, and it was just kind of a cultural exchange. But when you dig into it, you realize, no, actually, Harvard University had nothing to do with it. Harvard did not fund it. The program he ran was run by two Harvard graduates, but the university had no ties to it. And then the funding. If you look at the early press accounts by Walz himself in the 1990s, he talked about the fact, bragged about the fact that the Chinese government was actually paying the bulk of the cost for these kids to travel to China. And the advice that he gave to students, again, this is contemporaneous back in the 1990s, he told the American students to downplay their Americanness when they travel to China, which is kind of bizarre if the purpose of a cultural exchange is to actually have an exchange.
Right. We're going to go do a cultural exchange, but by all means, hide your culture while we're there.
Right, exactly. I mean, we wouldn't tell Chinese students to come here and play down your Chineseness. I mean, that would be ridiculous. The other part of it is this sort of glowing explanation that he would give students about the Chinese system. He described to students how this is a system, unlike in the United States, where nobody's poor because everybody shares. Of course, the compulsive dictatorial regime of China, sharing is voluntary. So certainly calling it sharing is an extremely charitable explanation. And I think this is part of the problem. Here's the other interesting thing, Larry, is that he had a meeting with Premier Li, who's the second most powerful man in China, when he was in Congress. And in that meeting, he said, I was in Tibet in late 1989, and the Chinese officials interrupted him and said, no, you were there in February of 1990. I mean, in other words, they tracked him and they knew exactly what he was doing 30 years earlier.
Yeah.
Tim Walz, his finances are a bit of an anomaly, especially in presidential politics. He has no investments, no bonds, no stock holdings, and he has no real estate. He apparently doesn't even own a home currently. What do you make of that? That seems very odd to me. Most people who sort of rise to this level are have some financial security, often are wealthy, and not that there's anything wrong that he comes from modest means. But what do you make of that? It seems a little strange to me and to many observers.
Oh, it's a great point, Julie. Yeah, it is a little bit odd, and I think as it relates to the relationship in China, it's pretty clear what the Biden's motivation was. Right? It was very transactional. It was with they took in millions of dollars. I think in Walz's case, it seems to be more of kind of a true believer, and he will occasionally criticize the Chinese government for human rights, but then he will almost immediately say, yeah, but we have lots of problems too, and we're no better. In fact, he had that meeting with Premier Li in 2016, and by his own account, he said he told Premier Li, yes, you have human rights problems, but don't look to us as an example because we have as many problems as you guys do. And this is something that is enormously helpful to the Chinese Communist Party, and they call it big help with a little bad mouth. That's actually their expression. And what it means is look, we understand you're going to have to criticize us from time to time, but you're helping us in the bigger picture, and that is certainly the case when you look at Walz's record.
We're speaking with Peter Schweizer. His latest book is Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. But, Peter, your last book, Red Handed, documents a whole lot of exchanges between the Chinese Communist Party and elites in politics and in the media and in pop culture here in America. How, these elites get rich while they help China and their causes. And you mentioned in that book, if I remember right, Peter, these so-called cultural exchanges. There's a whole lot of stuff going on our college campuses, and there's a whole lot of things that happen in this country that is funded by Beijing under the guise of cultural exchange, but they're really intelligence operations, aren't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Larry. They call it elite capture. That's again their term. And elite capture, is basically saying, look, we want to get in good and, in a sense, capture the elite of a country. And they do this, right, not only in Washington, D.C., they do this with governors. They do this with members of Congress, with members of the state legislature.
Well, hold on. I mean, Tim Walz is a governor. Tim Walz was a member of Congress, and he was, I mean, what you're describing here makes it sound like China was sort of playing a long game with this guy.
Oh, I think there's no question about it. And when he becomes governor of Minnesota, he does something very interesting. He's elected in 2018. At that time, most of the investment world is putting a brake. Pension funds, they're putting a brake on investing in China because of all the concerns that are being raised about the money's being building up their military. It's helping their foreign policy. So states like California and Washington State are slowing down their investments in China. States like Florida, where I live, are actually reversing and divesting from China. Tim Walz is the only one running toward them. He's the chairman of the Minnesota Investment Board, which invests their pension funds. And as he becomes governor, their stake in investments go up 70% since he's been governor. He's really one of the few, the only one I found, who's actually doing that. As governor, he also, shows up and gives speeches. In 2019, he gave a speech in Minnesota to a so-called friendship organization, which has been known for 20 years to be a front for the CCP and Chinese intelligence. The Biden administration says the same thing. He's the key line speaker. He's the only government official at any level who is giving a speech at this meeting.
Wow.
And it's not the only time that he's done it. So there are these really strange kinds of anomalies and behaviors that, he needs to give an accounting for. Because let's be clear, if Kamala Harris wins in November, he will set himself up to be the China guy, right? She doesn't have any experience. I've been there 30 times. Let me handle the Chinese portfolio.
Yeah.
So we need to know more about this relationship.
Wow. I sure hope Dana Bash is calling Peter Schweizer before her big interview tomorrow and saying, hey, if you were me, what question would you ask Tim Walz? That would be some good journalism there. My friend and colleague, Peter Schweizer, one of the smartest men out there. Peter, thank you. Always great to talk with you, sir.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy it always. Thanks.
WMAL, making sense of the border, because laws either matter or they don't. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
Larry, did you know that Meghan Markle launched a new business venture a couple months? I think it was in April or
Please
March.
tell me more.
Yes, American Riviera Orchard. It hasn't really.
American Riviera Orchard. God, that just sounds so snooty and elite. And
yeah, she tried to string together the biggest words she knew and put them in a title. But this new venture, nobody knows much about it. Apparently, she sent out strawberry jam, and she's saying that they're going to do dog bones and maybe wine. It's all over the place. But apparently, she's harder to work for than Kamala Harris because since March, 18 staffers have quit, which I have to say, I'm amazed there are 18 staffers for a venture that hasn't really gotten off the ground yet. Right. And now the news out of New York Post is that she can't find a CEO for American Riviera Orchard. So not sure it's ever going to get off the ground.
So no one wants to work with her.
No one wants to work with her. Now, remember, Meghan Markle, there was this big report that came out of, out of Great Britain that she bullied a bunch of sort of royal servants and royal staff. So it's not looking good for Meghan. More bad PR.
This does sound like Kamala Harris over the last 5 years, right? Doesn't she have like 2 people left from her original staff?
Yeah, I think so. But this isn't good for her. They just cannot seem to get any traction here in the United States.
How soon until Prince Harry does a Ben Affleck here?
I honestly, if you watched that Jane Pauley interview, it was a pretty softball interview. Yeah. They looked so miserable. They actually looked at each other in the way that, when you're sitting with your wife, I'm sitting with my husband, and maybe I don't want to put you in that situation, but sometimes I'll be sitting with my husband and he'll say something and I look at him like, what did you just say? There was a lot of those visual exchanges in that Jane Pauley interview. So I don't think all is well with the Duke and Duchess.
That is not she's a royal pain in the butt. It's 7:53.